Hunt for the Fallen Star. Chapter 16. Back to the Fallen Star. They wormed from the hole into rapidly fading twilight. Casey slowed momentarily to pull the rain poncho out of his pack for Heather. She thanked him and quickly pulled it over her head as they walked down the slope. Unlike the dry air earlier, the atmosphere had turned still and heavy with moisture. A layer of clouds thickened above them and cloaked the sky in a robe of grays and black. A short distance away, the massive bulk of the old spectral wreck rose up from the barren wasteland. James led them out of the ruins into the flatlands and stopped. He looked from the old wreck towards the still smoldering new crash, peering into the darkness, and took a slow step forward. He shook his head, reached up, and turned on the headlamp that was still on his forehead. The light beam swung across the ground. Before James could say anything, Casey pointed to some impressions in the crusty soil and added, "Our tracks are over there." He nodded in the darkness and added, "I think I can see some light out there, probably from the ship's ramp." Without warning, a freezing blast of wind tore into them from the lowlands, its invisible icy tendrils reaching into and through every opening in their clothes. Heather dropped her head, clung the poncho tightly about her, and braced against the frigid air. James ducked his head against the onslaught. "Let's get to the ship quick," he urged. "I think things are about to get worse. Casey, your eyesight's better than mine in the dark. You lead." Casey nodded and strode into the darkening, swirling air while he shielded his eyes from the grating dust and shivered. Several seconds into the howling wind, the ship's ramp became visible beneath a shaft of light. A familiar figure stepped cautiously down the ramp. Seeing the threesome quickly approaching, Layla walked out from under the ship and called through the windstorm, "I was hoping it was you three. Did you find anything?" "A lot of nothing," admitted Heather, her voice strained over the wind, "although we did find some water." "There might be something worth going back for," said Casey, but the gale thrust an angry swipe of dust and choked his voice. A thunderous pounding, like the pummeling hooves of 1,000 wild horses racing across the prairie, grew ominous. "Ouch!" scowled James, grabbing his arm. Casey looked back at his brother and saw a white-green golf ball-sized object roll across the ground. "What the— Ouch!" he yelped when something whacked his back. The thundering gallop increased its intensity. White-green balls of ice began to hammer into crusted soil. "Oh, hail!" yelled James. "Under the ship, quick!" A bright flash of lightning illuminated the thick mass of billowing clouds overhead, and the ground shuddered in response to the thunderous crack. Over the nearby hills, an impenetrable dark gray curtain fell from the blackened sky and hurled hailstorms mercilessly into the ground. Layla retreated under the ship as the cascade of icy projectiles quickly approached. Casey, James, and Heather dashed the short distance while the wind angrily threw darts of soil that stung any exposed skin. Behind them, the ground roiled with increasingly larger hailstones that smashed into it. They paused at the bottom of the ramp, icy shards of breath surrounding them, and stared in mute awe at the barrage outside the perimeter of the ship. The sound was near deafening. Most of the hail was now grapefruit-sized, but several basketball hailstones exploded into the ground and rolled their remnants under the ship. The remains under the ship. "Let's go inside," yelled Casey, pointing up the ramp. They disappeared up the ramp as the dark wall encroached on the ship and began pummeling its surface. Casey shivered as he touched the ramp panel. A couple seconds later, the pounding was muffled. In the control room, a red light bar faded in and out under the image of the ship floating over the center display. Casey touched the light, and instantly the beacons on the ship were silenced, when a soft blue hue enveloped the 3D image. Around them, the external view screens revealed only black. Casey pulled his pack off and set it on his chair. "James, let's see what we got left to eat and divide things up." James shook off his pack, and the brothers rummaged for remnants of something to share as a meal. Options were meager. Finding 4 granola bars left, they split 2 and saved the last 2 for the next day. James slowly savored his few bites of granola bar. "I suppose the good news is at least we should have plenty of water." He closed his eyes briefly with another bite, then continued, "I think tomorrow morning we should hit that alien cargo ship and see if it has anything useful. This hailstorm should take care of any remaining fires. And maybe, said Heather, we should go back to that cliff-based facility for a closer look. Casey smiled a cheesy grin at Heather. You know, you were right. We did land on the moon at an alien rendezvous base. Heather landed a light-hearted punch on his shoulder. Maybe, but I didn't say we'd have an alien rendezvous that could have gotten us killed. By the way, you're getting good at flying this ship. Casey shrugged. Thanks. Guess it's my knack with mechanical things, especially if they fly. Layla popped a small sampling of granola bar into her mouth and cocked her head at Heather. I've been dying to ask you, how'd you guys meet and get involved with the dig? You're like best friends, but none of you have degrees that really relate to archaeology or the dig. I know the professor is your uncle, but you three act like you've known each other for years. Heather smiled at the two brothers sitting in the front seats, who turned around to hear how she would answer. We actually met at a martial arts class 13 years ago? James nodded and finished savoring a nibble of granola bar. Something like that. Heather was new in the class, but was already an experienced martial artist. He looked at his brother for confirmation. I think Dad had something to do with convincing Sensei to teach her. Anyway, Sensei had us spar the last half of class, probably because we weren't being very respectful towards her. Anyway, she quickly kicked our butts a half-dozen times. And then Casey kicked mine when Sensei switched our sparring to weapons in the Shinai, replied Heather. In response to Layla's puzzled look, she added, Shinai are bamboo swords. James tucked his last morsel of granola bar into his mouth. And we've been best friends ever since. Layla's head tilted in curiosity. So you guys trained in karate? Sensei was a grandmaster in several styles, Casey explained. Mostly Japanese, but also Korean and some Chinese. His classes were like mixed martial arts of mostly karate, aikido, taekwondo, hapkido, along with a mix of kung fu and weapons training. The other two weren't as interested, but he trained me in kenjutsu and kendo. And I took classes in Haidong Gumdo from another master he knew. Dad started us in different martial arts classes when we were little. Somehow he knew Sensei. And when Sensei migrated to the States about 15 years ago, Dad convinced him to train us. Heather and her mom moved into our rural neighborhood, and Dad got her invited to the class. We trained with Sensei for about 10 years before a knot tightened in Casey's throat. Life took us in different directions. But somehow you all managed to be at the dig, said Layla. Heather's eyes stared into an unknown horizon as she blinked away extra moisture. Yeah, you know I love languages, so my uncle asked me to come, more as his personal translator. He convinced me the classes I took in anthropology and ancient cultures of Central America would be helpful, so I decided to go along. But it's actually James who started it. I think he's the one who persuaded the professor to convince me to come. James smiled sheepishly. Heather continued. James spent a couple years backpacking around Central and South America. About a year ago, he took a class from my uncle. Toward the end of the semester, he asked him some questions which led to some more discussions, which led to the expedition. She raised her brow at James. Although I know James was a big part behind getting the dig started, I'm not sure how he got the information. And Casey was between jobs, added James, so I convinced him to join us with his LiDAR-equipped drone after I persuaded the professor of Casey's pilot and technological abilities and how they'd aid us in the dig. I thought it was because misery loved company, said Casey. A mischievous grin raised the corners of James's mouth. Hey, at least you're getting an out of the world adventure. True, but I would have said yes quicker if you just told me we're looking for an alien spaceship. You knew I thought it was going to be a meteorite. If you had told my uncle you were looking for a spaceship, he wouldn't have taken you seriously, said Heather. Still, he was quite excited about what the dig was turning up. Lightning brilliantly cracked across the clouds through the ceiling view screens. The intensity of the flash was instantly reduced through the view screens, and the room only briefly brightened. Several more flashes slashed silently across the boiling black clouds. The reverberations of explosive thunder were felt as the ground below the ship shuddered. Two lightning bolts speared at each other across the darkened sky, and clouds roiled together as if they were in a celestial brawl. The lightning flashes revealed large chunks of ice deflecting off the invisible shielding. The foursome watched silently while low rumbles of thunder reverberated through the ship with each lightning strike. James's voice almost whispered. Kind of reminds me of that freak storm in the Sierra Nevadas. Casey bit his lip and nodded slowly. Heather's eyes widened. Was that when you were struck by lightning? Casey nodded and stared at the light display through the ceiling. Layla's brows creased incredulously. Were you actually hit by lightning or just near the strike? James nodded. He was hit straight on. We were trying to take cover from a mountain storm that unexpectedly blew in. Casey had twisted his ankle, and insisted Dad and I go ahead to scout out some shelter. We were about 100 yards away when the static in the air became so palpable I felt my hair standing on end. Dad and I both looked back at Casey and saw the strike. Not near him, but right through him. Head shaking, James's hands instinctively rose to his ears with the memory. The thunder was so loud, the sound wave pushed me back. The flash blinded me for a few minutes, and then it took a few more for the spots to clear up. When I got up and my eyesight cleared, Casey was laying face down on the ground. Dad had already gotten to him. When I got to him, there was smoke wisps coming from his clothes, and he was unresponsive. So how badly were you hurt? Asked Layla. Casey felt his face warm at the attention. I thought he was dead, or at least dying, continued James. I was about to call for help on the radio when the craziest thing happened. Casey rolled over and opened his eyes. When he asked, he said he wasn't hurt, just sore all over, like he'd had too much of a workout from Sensei. Since the storm was passing quickly and Casey seemed okay, we waited a few minutes before returning to camp. Dad then drove us down the mountain faster than I'd ever seen him go before, and we got to the little rural hospital. The doctors didn't believe he'd been struck by lightning. No identifiable burn marks on the body, just some fading redness. The only evidence the doctors found of anything abnormal was Casey's clothing had huge charred holes throughout, like some fire moth had feasted on it. Heather turned toward Leia. I'd known them for a few years by then. When they got back and James told me the story, I didn't believe it. Even seeing the burned clothing was hard to believe. I jokingly told Casey he didn't get hurt because he has a way with anything that uses electricity. Realizing she was staring at Casey, Layla averted her eyes. Her stomach growled. On a different subject, I hope we find some food tomorrow. I'm thankful you guys had something to eat, but half a granola bar isn't much. I think going to the cargo ship is a good idea. Another bolt of lightning flashed across the sky. In a subdued tone, Heather added, I hope we can find a way home. End of chapter.